During the 3 weeks between the Italian and Portuguese Grand Prix, the Second World War officially ended. The four post-war occupying powers, the USA, USSR, UK and France, had never actually come to an official permanent agreement on the status of Germany, with the division of the country always regarded as provisional and temporary. It was one of the reasons that the small Rhineland town of Bonn had been chosen as the capital of West Germany, over bigger cities like Cologne or Frankfurt, to emphasise that this is just a temporary measure. Now, with the decision of the two Germanys to reunite, the Treaty on the Final Settlement with Respect to Germany was signed, renouncing all rights the four powers had within Germany, which in turn then explicitly renounced any claim on parts of the country's pre-1945 borders to the east that now lay within Poland and the USSR. While both Germanys had been, to all practical purposes, fully independent sovereign states, within the confines of their Cold War alliances, the so-called 2+4 agreement made that official and tidied up the last loose ends of World War II. As if to emphasise that the world was changing, that same week Pizza Hut opened their first restaurants in both Moscow and Beijing. According to Pizza Hut themselves, the Moskva pizza, topped with sardines, tuna, mackerel, salmon and onion, was an early favourite in the Russian capital, and it was certainly a successful move. In 2023, the chain opened its 3,000th location in China. And the International Olympic Committee announced the venue for the 1996 Olympic Games, the first time that the venue for the Summer Games had been announced without a corresponding Winter Games. 6 cities had bid, with one eliminated at each round of voting. Belgrade, Manchester, Melbourne and Tokyo all fell by the wayside, until the two remaining contenders were Athens and Atlanta, Georgia. Athens had hosted the inaugural modern Olympics in 1896 and was regarded as the sentimental choice, but worries about the city's ability to hold a major modern event led the organisers to choose Atlanta instead. With the 1990 season entering its final stages, most teams were by now concentrating on developing their 1991 cars, rather than continuing to develop this year's versions, though Ferrari had again tweaked their souped-up qualifying engine and were trialling a new traction control system, whereby a computer would adjust the amount of power going to the wheels to avoid wheel spin and sliding on dusty or wet surfaces. In terms of drivers, Ferrari finally confirmed after Monza that Alessandro Nannini would be driving for them next year, and then dramatically withdrew their announcement a week later and told everyone it would be Jean Alesi instead. So, what happened? Nannini talked to the BBC.
15 days before Monza, I talked with Flavio Briatore and I said, maybe I like to go in Ferrari for 2 years and then I come back in Benetton, because I like to stay in Benetton, it's not a problem, but 2 years in Ferrari I like. And then in the last week they proposed me a contract with 1 year and more 1 year with an option. And this I don't like, because I talk every time about 2 years, and I said no.
All of which only fed the frenzied speculation that Nigel Mansell would be reversing his retirement decision and rejoining his old team. Nothing official as yet, but the expectation was that it would be announced in Spain.
You give me a car which is reliable for next year, with an engine as quick as anybody else's, but not quicker, just as quick, and a very good team behind me, with number one status in the team, I might reconsider my position, maybe. But that isn't possible at the moment, so don't worry about it, I'm going to retire.
Tyrrell, for their part, announced that Stefano Modena would join Satoru Nakajima in their cockpit for next year. Guy Ligier had a coup of his own to announce too. We found out in Italy that he would be running Lamborghini engines in 1991, but for 1992 through 94 he had negotiated a 3-year supply of Renault engines on the same basis as the Williams team. And on the subject of engines, Life finally had their new Judd engine, and the team was up all night getting it fitted into the chassis, with high hopes that it would finally help them make it through pre-qualifying. It was not to be, though, because the engine may have been lighter, but it was also smaller and a different shape, and when Giacomelli went out to try and set a time, the engine cover blew off, and with no replacement, that was that. Maybe next time. So it was the usual 4 going through from Friday morning's session, albeit in a different order to last time, with Grouillard topping the timings again, followed by Dalmas, Gachot and Tarquini, with Moreno the only other driver even slightly in touch. Senna came out of the blocks fast as usual in qualifying, topping Friday afternoon's times 3/10 ahead of Prost, with Berger and Mansell behind, but on Saturday the boys in scarlet pulled something really special out of the bag, and Mansell went round almost a second and a half faster than Senna's Friday time to take his first pole of the year, with Prost just 0.038 seconds behind to take Ferrari's first front row lockout since Silverstone 1988. Senna, just 6,000th behind Prost, would have to make do with third, alongside his teammate, with Prix and Piquet on row 3, and Boutsen and Nannini split by 8th place Alesi. The Lolas were looking good again in 10th and 11th, with Capelli 12th, and his teammate, who was suffering from the flu, 14th. He lined up alongside Donnelly, while Derek Warwick was back in 22nd, but seemingly none the worse for wear after his Italian shunt. Dalmas and David Brabham formed the back row, with Guiard joining Barilla, Tarquini and Gasho in watching from the sidelines, and Azella team owner Gabriele Rumi fulminating about Pirelli not giving his team their best tyres. Satoru Nakajima was also suffering from the same flu bug as Gugelmin, and on Sunday morning he had an off in the warm-up and decided, with the agreement of Professor Sid Watkins, the F1 medic, that discretion was the better part of valour and he probably shouldn't drive, so he was signed off. But because it was Sunday already, it wasn't going to be possible to allow Guiard to start. It was a 25-car grid with a hole in 20th place as they lined up that afternoon under perfect racing conditions. And as a rare treat, I've found some footage with just the car noises and no commentary, so we actually get to listen to the cars. As the lights went green, Mansell slewed to his right, crowding Prost against the wall, giving Senna room to blast through into the lead with Berger in tow, while Prost had been sufficiently held up to allow Piquet through as well, dropping from 2nd to 5th before the first corner, and probably saying some very uncomplimentary things about his teammate. In fact, Nigel had decided he didn't entirely trust the new traction control and had switched it off for the race, only to badly muff the start and nearly spin right off the grid. Halfway round the first lap, De Cesaris did just that, depositing his Dallara in the kitty litter, so as they came round to finish the first lap, it was Senna leading Berger, then Mansell and Piquet, with Prost seemingly dropping back, chased by the Williamses and his future teammate Alesi. The start could hardly have gone better for Senna's championship hopes, while Prost had a lot of catching up to do. By lap 2, the McLarens were now pulling away from Mansell too, with Piquet looking for a way past the Ferrari. Yannick Dalmas parked up with a broken half-shaft on lap 4, and a couple of laps later Warwick, having charged up from 21st to 17th already, snapped his throttle linkage and he was out, disappointed as the Lotus cars had gone really well in the warm-up and he'd been confident of doing well. Meanwhile, his teammate Donnelly was chasing Bernard, giving some great footage as Martin had a forward-facing camera and Eric had a rearward-facing one. Unfortunately, it was not to last, as Martin's alternator packed up after just 15 laps and he came in to retire, with Bernard joining him 10 laps later with a gearbox failure. Prost, meanwhile, had caught back up to Piquet, while Mansell had shaken off his old rival and caught back up to Berger and was trying to pass the Austrian. Prost finally got past Piquet after 12 frustrating laps and was chasing Mansell, putting in a blistering series of laps until he was right up with the leaders. On lap 25, Mansell slid a bit wide and allowed Prost through. Poetic justice perhaps, but Mansell did seem to be having some troubles with adhesion. By then, a rather processional race had run almost a third distance, and Patrese came in for tyres, making a complete mess of things, while Piquet came and went in the same time. Mansell was the first of the front runners a lap later, dropping only one place thanks to Patrese and Piquet's stops, and then it was Senna, who elected to come in as he was approaching a knot of back markers. Just as he did so, Prost pulled out and out-dragged Berger on the main straight to take the lead. He only held it for the rest of that lap before he came in too, but a sticking left rear wheel nut lost him precious seconds and he rejoined 5th. Boutsen wouldn't get to make his stop, a smoking Renault put him paid to his race on lap 31 of the 71. And then it was Berger in for a typically slick McLaren stop. So once the top 4 had all stopped, Senna led once more but had Mansell right on his gearbox after a series of fastest laps, and on lap 41, perhaps with the memories of last year at Estoril in his mind, didn't contest the place when Mansell went for it. After all, at least it wasn't Prost. Mansell was clearly quicker too, immediately herring off into a 2-second lead, and soon he was back up to that clutch of backmarkers that everyone had pitted to avoid passing 10 laps earlier. Both Ligiers scrapping with Pierluigi Martini. Alio moved aside on lap 53 to let Mansell through, only to cut back in too soon, touch the Ferrari and send himself spinning backwards into the barriers, spraying debris everywhere, but a very lucky Nigel Mansell was able to continue on his way with no damage at all, so slight had been the contact. A suitably chastened Philippe didn't really look in the mood for autographs. By now, there were just 20 laps to go, and Senna had acquired Berger and Prost right behind him. Mansell had said that he would support his teammates' title efforts, so Prost was determined to put that to the test by getting past the McLarens. On lap 59, he was past Berger. 12 laps to go and only Senna to get past before Mansell would, he hoped, move over and let him take the win. But fate was to intervene against Prost just one more time this weekend. Back in 9th place, Alex Caffey was holding off a hard-charging Suzuki when the two collided, absolutely demolishing the arrows on a tricky corner, and Alex seemed to be in some pain, so the race was red flagged after 61 of the planned 71 laps, enough that full points would be scored, and after a season full of frustration so far, Nigel Mansell would be able to leave Ferrari with at least one more win under his belt. He went straight over to Prost afterwards, apologised profusely for the start, admitted it was the worst he'd ever made, which seemed to mollify Alain, who was in philosophical mood as he spoke to the media afterwards.
Nothing to say except that was maybe one of the most unlucky races I've done in my career. No, I'm not thinking anymore about the championship. No, for me, I think Ayrton won today.
Alex Caffey, meanwhile, it turned out was fine, but had sprained his ankle, and with the next race just a week away, Jackie Oliver might well need to find a substitute. So, Senna's lead over Prost extended slightly to 18 points with 3 races left. Whatever Prost said, it wasn't over yet, but this was Senna's 11th points finish, so he'd have to start discarding those 3 third-place finishes as of now. Each win would now only get him a net of 5 points. Prost had 10 points finishes, so would still score full points in Spain, then had a 5th place and a brace of 4ths, so he would lose a maximum of 5 points to the best 11 rule. Over in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren still led by 34 points, so barring a catastrophic last 3 races, they were sitting pretty, but so many times in F1 history, a team or driver looking nailed on for the championship with 3 races to go has proceeded to come a cropper.
Fortunately, the impact, although it was very hard, I survived. The wheel went over my head. I see everything happening. Everything was, I was completely conscious for the whole of the event. But all the time it was happening, I was thinking of, it's amazing the amount of things that go through your mind. I mean, although the accident only took 4 or 5 seconds, I reckon I was actually in the car having that accident for at least 2 hours.